Well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming today. We are going to have a very interesting presentation by Professor Pablo Martí. He's a professor from the University of Alicante in Spain, and he has a PhD in urban design from the Department of Urbanism of the Polytechnic University of Valencia in Spain. He's a full professor in the University of Alicante for urban design and regional planning. And he has been researching a lot about Mediterranean cities and Mediterranean urbanism, especially, and this is the topic for today, he's going to, or he has been developed a very interesting and I think pioneering research on how to use the amazing amount of information and the quality that I mean the quantity and quality that of information provided by social media, and how to use that information, those social media, into a mapping, into a understanding, a better understanding of our cities. He leads a research group called Mapping Game. I think he has you can search for it in the website. So on the web, you can search or you can see his work together with his research group. And well, he has already like a long experience in different universities. And he's also, which I think is also always important, he's also a practicing architect and urban design, and he has also like experience from the field. And I think that makes him a perfect guest for today's lecture. Hello, Pablo. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Jorge, not only for the presentation, but especially for inviting me or giving me the opportunity to talk about our experience in this issue, in this idea of using the geolocated data that nowadays are shared in all of our countries. I would like to thank very much Professor Jorge Almazán for giving me the opportunity to talk about an issue that we have been working on during our last 7-10 years. So first of all, thanks to KU University, Jorge Almazán and his team for having given me the opportunity to explain and talk about this issue. Well, the idea is to talk about how these social media located data could be useful, could be used to for urban analysis, for trying to understand how we in fact use the city. I'm going to start, well, first of okay, what happens now? Now, well, first of all, we are we are far away, but there are also some conditions, the geographical conditions that are similar in Tokyo and Alicante, which is mainly that we share parallel 38 north. So that means that even though we are far away, we have some aspects in common and some geographical aspects that we share. I wanted to say that Spain is here in Europe. We are same level. This is I'm introducing a little bit Europe, because the examples and some case studies that I will talk about are mainly related in this geographical area. So this is Spain, France, UK, United Kingdom, and we'll talk as well about the north of Europe, about Sweden and Gothenburg. So mainly the examples that I will give are mainly focused on this European area. Nevertheless, we have developed some research in other geographical areas, and we are very happy to try this methodology in different areas as we are trying to do with the group, with the research team of Professor Jorge Almazán. No, back to Spain. I am exactly here in Alicante, but we will talk about Valencia, Madrid, and other parts of the country. No, so I just wanted to tell you that we are exactly here, which is the Mediterranean, mainly in the middle of the Spanish Mediterranean arc, which is one of the most populated areas in Spain. No, so once I have introduced a little bit the geographical situation, I'm going now to explain, or to try to explain, why we started and why we think that these data that are shared through social networks could be useful, could be interesting to approach to for understanding urban dynamics. My first slide is more or less this. I introduced you Spain, and here we have two maps. The one on the left-hand side is the map that represents the physical framework, the physical urban areas and infrastructures in Spain. And on the right-hand side, we have each dot represents one transaction in Wallapop. I don't know if you know Wallapop. Wallapop is an app in which you can sell and buy second-hand items. So the first comparison that we can have from these big-scale maps is that somehow the virtual layer of the information that we share in the cloud has a lot of offers some representativeness of the physical framework of the places and the geographies where we are. That happens because we have, on one hand, the human activity, which in this case is represented by the action of selling and buying, and we have the physical framework in which we develop our human activity. So we have two layers, the physical one and the human activity, that could be very interesting to study, and to study the relation between these two layers. The next map, it's trying to go further in terms of, we have here in terms of trying to explain what each app could offer us. No, here we have a comparison between Twitter, now X, Twitter. Well, I hope everyone knows Twitter, which is a micro blogging system. I mean, it's an app in which you can send messages and photos and videos. And Strava, which is a total different, because it represents the sportive runs of people who is registered. So if we compare these two maps with the physical map of Spain, we again see that there are some relations, and we can even consider the different degree of intensity depending on each app, on each network, because each network has its own focus. Going to or trying to zoom into the city, because we had a big scale approach till now, but this is the map of Madrid. On the left-hand side, we have the physical representation of buildings. I mean, yes, any building is represented in black, and the white areas represent empty spaces like parks or streets, boulevards, etc. So on the left-hand side, we have the physical representation, and on the right-hand side, we have the representation of 6 social networks overlapped. And if we compare these two images, these two cartographies, we can in the digital city, or what we call here the digital city, which represents the data uploaded by users in the same specific area in Madrid, the same specific urban area, we can see that we can recognize the tissue of all areas in the city, but the main difference is related to the void spaces or the white spaces that we had on the representation of the physical city. There are areas like this is an important park called Retiro. This is a railway station, and all the area of trains stop and parking. But we have here one of the main avenues called Castellana Avenue, which is the avenue that goes along from north to south. That in fact is one of the core areas of the city. One of the structural avenues in the city. And in fact, even that it's in white, it happens nothing on the left-hand side map. If we go to the digital city, it's more difficult to recognize this avenue, Castellana Avenue, because there is a lot of activity in this area, even though it's an empty space, it's a public space. So from that point of view, these data allow us to understand better which is the human activity in the city, not only the activity that happens in buildings, that happens in offices, at home, but as well the activity that is developed in open spaces. These ideas led us to think of this idea, no? So we have the city as the physical framework of urban activity on one hand, but we are interested as well as on the urban activity as the expression of the citizens. That means that we are interested in knowing which is the economic and the urban activity location patterns where this activity is and which characteristics does it have. As well, which are the preferences, the perceptions, and the use of urban spaces by their citizens. But studying this through the location-based social networks data can offer us some patterns and some idea of the users that offer an important insight for the design and intervention of strategies in the city, but in that case, taking into account citizens' preferences, activities, and behavior. No, that again offer us the idea of the action or the policy or the plan, the urban plan, in terms of changing or transforming or designing the city. And as well, we have an insight to define how the physical framework of a new city, a transformed city, etc., is could be according to these uses. I'm going to talk mainly in this lecture about 5 things, or 5 aspects, which are, first of all, just a brief introduction about the potential of virtual information of this data according to scholars and other authors. Secondly, the study of the city through this data. How do we select? Which is the methodology, the areas, and thematics. The different sources of information that you use for having this idea of behavior and patterns and preferences of citizens in the city, as well. And of course, we have to talk about the limitations and difficulties that these data encounter, and just a few case studies in which we can see how this data, this methodology can be used, can be applied to certain studies in the city. Well, first of all, as I mentioned, the potential of virtual information. There are mainly 4 group of ideas that are pointed out by different authors, different scholars, about in which sense or what would be the potential use of this data. And we have, as I said, 4 group of ideas. The first one, I just wrote some authors with their, well, the year is the reference to some articles, some papers. Well, the first group tries to explain that the data that we share could have a representativeness of the physical reality of the city. No, for example, here there's a very interesting work done in Boston, in which the methodology of the work that Kevin Leach carried out in Boston, and how using Instagram and the Instagram information could we represent as well some aspects of what was presented some time ago. The second idea, the second group of ideas about this utility is that this data can show us some activities that are not explicit. So the idea would be that this data could also help us to identify non-explicit phenomena that take place in the city. No, well, it has to be with the. We can, I mean, for example, in our studies, we have discovered that sometimes there are non-formal public spaces that held some activity, or mainly the idea that I tried to explain in the case of Madrid, in which some vacant areas could have activity. Some of them not, but some vacant areas that we think that they have no activity could have them if we look at this data in a careful way. No, this is a map of Helsinki in Finland, in which on the left-hand side it's represented the physical city, and on the right-hand side represents this idea of the importance of data. And in this case, the importance of the data are represented by the intensity of the globes. The third idea that it is commonly mentioned is that this virtual reality mixed with the physical reality sometimes becomes some hybrid space in which both realities have an important relationship. No, here we can read the new hybrid space that understands the physical and virtual relationship as in an interaction and feedback between both. As I am in Alicante, I'm sorry that I give you an example, a Spanish example, which is the following. This town Calpe, which is in Alicante, has an architecture that was produced by a Catalonian architect called Bofill some time ago, and in the last, I mean, I think 5 years ago, this image, this picture became the most cited, most represented picture or image in Instagram in Spain. That made that a lot of people went to this place just to take the same picture they had seen in Instagram. Well, this is an example on how this physical space could become an important space just because it's important in the virtual world, no? Somehow. Well, we all know that some scenarios, some areas in some cities became very important because this area was shot in a film, no? Or the people that goes to a specific place to visit the same area that was the scenario of an important film, no? The fourth group of scholars defend or think that as well this data could be used for citizen participation in a non-invasive way, no? So the idea of in terms of that the expression of ideas for citizens participation in different actions or processes, and mainly the so-called volunteer geographical information, in which we can share in the cloud the information that each user understands important on a specific place. So once we have these 4 ideas, I don't know if I will be asked about which is our position, but on these four thematic positions, no? But that could be a question later on, no? So now let's go to how we use this data, no? Well, mainly how do we select, which networks do we select, some methodological aspects, which are the areas of studies, and which are the thematic applications of this data. Well, the first thing is that among all apps, all networks, our selection criteria is that these networks should offer us 2 conditions. The first one is that they are geolocated. We mean that we need to know where exactly this information is shared. So as we study what happens in the city or in any geographical site, we need to know where this data is applied to a specific space, no? So this is the first condition we need that we establish for the selection of networks, no? That we want to know where this information is produced. And the second one is that shows human activity, because we are interested in understanding how citizens think, how citizens go, where citizens go, where citizens buy things, and how do they perceive the city, for example. So from that point of view, among all apps or among all networks, we just use those which have these 2 conditions: geolocated data and information about about human activity. In fact, well, mainly here I show you mainly which are the networks that we use, no? Which are mainly Google Places. I think that you probably know Google Places. If not, I'm sure you all are using Google Maps. And sometimes you say, I want to go to this restaurant, or I have to travel to this place. And this place is a place in Google Places. So in other words, Google Places is the data set, the data set of places in Google Maps. So it mainly offers information about economic and urban activities. Then we have Foursquare, which is an app used in a mobile, in which users check in when they visit certain spaces. Twitter, I mentioned before, it's a show text sending app, no? Instagram, it's used mainly to share photographs, and we use it to understand the urban image and the perception of people in this sense, no? I didn't mention that Twitter allows us to understand the presence, opinion, and presence in exact time and exact place in the city. Foursquare, we understand that could give us some insights about citizens' preferences, and Google Places as some scholars say, it's like the old yellow pages. I don't know if in Japan do yellow pages exist, or like in other words, it's like the mapping of any activity in the world, no? As well, we have these other networks that allow us to understand other things. For example, Strava or Map by Run or Wikilog, we can understand how the sport activity is developed in a certain place, or Airbnb, and this is a Spanish one, which is a real estate agency, no, that offers us information about prices and in terms of rent and buying houses or apartments, no? So what we really do is that we download this data. We have to proceed in careful verification, validation, and filtering. Then we visualize this data, and that allows us to approach different urban phenomena. Just some information about which is the validity and usefulness of this data, because there is well, especially, well, we developed this part because especially when we started, we always were asked about representativeness, about accuracy, and about what these data show. And mainly, and as well, we were said that these data were biased, because some people among the whole population were using these data. And this is why we tried to understand which were the accuracy, the representativeness, and the information that was shown. Here we compare, trying to understand. This is mainly to explain not only the validity, but also in which sense they can help us, this data. On the left-hand side, we have a fieldwork in which it's a Mediterranean city in the front of the sea, near the beach, no? And we just compare which activities could be recorded by fieldwork and which activities were registered by Google Places data. Well, the idea was, in that case, that we found 14 food establishments in both cases. We found 8 stores in fieldwork and only 6 in Google Places. We find 5 lodging activity in fieldwork, which means hotels or apartments, and as well 5 Google Places lodging, no? And we could recognize 6 buildings devoted to exclusively to residential use. And on the contrary, we couldn't find any reference to the residents in Google Places. But as well, we identified 5 offices which were not on the ground floor, because the fieldwork was done taking into account what happened on the ground floor. And we were not able in the fieldwork to know if there was an architect bureau, or a lawyer office, or an administrative office in the third floor, for example, no? But Google Places was able to offer us not only what happened on the ground floor, but as well what happened on the on the higher floors, and as well 5 other activities appear. In general, we didn't know what characteristics do they have. Here's an explanation of what these data, for example, the Google Places data offer. They offer what, for example, is exactly a representation of what I was saying, no? This is a lawyer, this is a consultancy, this is management, real estate, but as they are in higher floors, sometimes the fieldwork cannot identify them, no? In this case, that's Murcia, we try to compare again the file work, the Foursquare data, and the Google Places. And the amount of results were different. The fieldwork offered 2,800 places. Foursquare, which is mainly registered by users, offer less. And Google Places offer the most important amount of data, as Google Places, as we mentioned, offer always not only the ground floor activity, but as well what happens on higher floors. But the important thing is that we try to identify which were the central areas, the centralities in Murcia. So the important thing in these maps are the representation of centralities in terms of concentration of activity. And in that way, we can understand that these maps are not very different. And some concentrated activities are represented in any case, even though the amount of data are different. In this case, we compare again the fieldwork you can see on the left-hand side, and the Google Places data, no? And we mark which were wrong, which didn't exist, and which were new. And this was a summary, no, of this data. And well, in fact, the idea is that among 421 raw data set, the 356 were valid. No, only 7 had wrong coordinates. 44 were not included in Google, and 58 couldn't be identified on fieldwork. That means that from the 421 data that we had in the beginning, we understand that the 407 were valid, which is an important amount of data. And that try to explain that this data could be useful. I do not think that they represent the whole reality, the whole world, absolutely, but they can be used. They can be used as a show, as a representative way of some aspects. Well, this is. I'm going to check the time, because if not, okay. This is the data that these networks have, but the important thing is mainly 2 things that I'm going to be briefly explained. Well, first of all, we have the geolocation, and some important aspect that we have from these networks is that we have a ranking of these places. So these places are ranked depending on which importance do they have for the users. This ranking, we can find it in Foursquare, in Google Places. Twitter, we can understand the rank in terms of the tweets that are recent, as well in Instagram. And the other important aspect that we use a lot is that all these data are categorized. That means that we have these places, but we can understand which categories do they belong to. For example, in Foursquare here, we had, this is a town in Spain, and we, in the case of Foursquare, we have two numbers: the number of check-ins and visits and the number of users. That means that a person can check in a lot of times, but the different users are the amount of different people that visit the place, no? And sometimes we use the idea of the visitors, or in some cases we use the idea of check-ins depending on what do we want to study. If we want to study the crowd aspect of this place, we would go to the check-ins. But if we want to understand in which sense this space is used by different people, we will try to look at the visitors. No, I was mentioning that important thing is the categories. That's important because each venue or place is categorized, and that allows us to establish this based on these main categories, and as well there is a subcategory in each one of these big categories. That's Foursquare. On the contrary, Google Places offers 120 different categories. And for example, in this case, that's in London, we could organize all these Google Place information in these 10 main categories that Foursquare provides, to understand which is the concentration or not of each type of activity: cultural, educational, food, health, nightlife, professional, service, shopping, or travel and transport. No. Another way that we have been using the information is based on the American Planning Association categories. In other studies, what we have done is to transform these categories in the APA categories, and especially there is because it's a structure system of assigning categories, and in that case it was very interesting to these 2000 general sales and service category, because it distinguishes which are the categories that are held on the ground floor. About Twitter, we have studied that the 98% of tweets are sent by individuals, and only a small percentage are bots or are influencers or are people who send a lot of tweets. So what we usually do is we delete, we don't use these tweets which are sent massively. Another aspect that I would like to mention, I think I finished with the methodological part with this, is that we believe that using different layers of information, it's very useful to understand what happens in a city. So that means that we use social media data, but we try to understand as well statistical data. I mean, the data offered by administrations, by NGOs, by associations, which are as well an important insight when we try to understand what happens in the city. And what we have been doing usually is to understand the different layers and to analyze what offers each layer. Okay. Where do we have studied this data? We have used this data in very different scales: urban plazas, linear access, districts or neighborhoods, and the whole municipality. No, we can understand what happens in a specific urban space. No, for example, this map shows in the historical center of Valencia and Alicante, which are the activities that surround an important square, an important plaza, but as well, which are the surrounding activities in the different distances, and how these squares become nodes that are at the same time connected by streets, and in which sense they offer a network of activity in the city, and this network is important to be identified in terms of identifying as well the parcours or the recorrido, the people, how people use these connections. Sorry. That's more or less the for example, in that case, we use the first plot of a street to understand what happened, to understand what is or which is the activity related to this street. We try to define the case study by using the first plot. In that case, in Birmingham, in the United Kingdom, we explore the possibility of using this data to understand clusters of activity. So what we did in that case, it's an axis that goes from the center of the city to the peripheral area and crosses different neighborhoods with a different social and economic residents, social and economic residents. So what we did is we established buffers in each place or dot in 10-25 meters, and through these buffers we were able to identify some clusters of activity and then to analyze which were the differences between these clusters. No, this is an example in which finally we studied these two clusters. No, because with using 25 meters we could identify these two clusters, the continuity of activity forming a cluster. Another use that we carried out, and which is, I think, something, at least for us, it was interesting to understand, is that we studied in Gothenburg, in Sweden, for in residential areas, for neighborhoods called the intermediate city, which were places that were not in the central area, neither in the peripheral area. They were places which were in between. And the town hall was interested in understanding how these areas could be transformed in a more dense and in a more and to find where to place some activity. And in that case, we were asked to identify the third places in these neighborhoods. The important thing is that, at least for us, it was interesting to understand that mainly this data I'm going to focus on is that here we compare the average income per years with the average income, the average number of data, or the number of data of each neighborhood. And we discovered that if considering the less economic neighborhood as the base one, the difference between the most power neighborhood compared with the neighborhood with the higher average income was a difference between 2 and 61. But the difference of virtual data in these neighborhoods were 1 to 3.26. That means that, and we compare with the rest of the neighborhoods, that showed us that the amount of virtual data is as well related to the income economic status of each neighborhood. So somehow the virtual data can be well, an important aspect to consider when studying the city. No, we compare as well with the case of Valencia, and well, this I think I'm talking too much. I'm going to go a little bit quicker. Sometimes, well, we use data in a geolocated point, but sometimes when we want to compare this data with others, we need to establish a grid to know what happens inside each grid and to compare with other data. No, well, this is as well a case of using the whole city, in which we compare the official administrative neighborhoods with what we call the functional clusters. We divided the city of Alicante in the same parts as the same amount of parts as the administrative neighborhoods, and we define each functional neighborhood or cluster depending on proximity of activities. And we found this a new distribution, but the important thing was that if the official distribution of neighborhoods divides some areas which are really linked between them or among them, the functional clusters allow us to identify these axes as the core spaces of the delimited new functional cluster. Well, this is Valencia, and well, limitations and difficulties. Well, we can have a lack of representativeness with respect to the total population. Sometimes we don't have sufficient number of records. As well, we have a vulnerability of access to social media data because firms change the way to access. Another difficulty is the interpretation of databases. And as well, we have to mention that the companies providing data have their interests. So we have to consider which are the interests of these data for the companies that provide the information. Mainly to finish with some examples, we have been using this data to understand economic activities. what is the supply and demand of economic and urban activities in the city, which is the presence of people, where are people at night, during the day, during the week, during the weekend, preferences, what urban spaces and activities do citizens prefer, opinion, what do citizens think about urban spaces and economic activities in the city. And as well, this data allow us to monitoring urban dynamics, analyze the above data over the time, or in terms of the specific actions or policies. We can analyze the differences in time, as well are useful to establish interventions and urban regeneration strategies. That way we can identify actions or interventions with the greatest potential for generating urban activity, and as well, as I mentioned, facilitating public participation. No? Depending on each aspect that we use, we try to include different layers. No, I was mentioning that one thing that we understood with using this data is that we cannot use only a layer, only a network information, but overlapping this information, we could have a more deep idea of what happens in the city. Here, for example, we studied important access in New York, in I think Mexico, and this is Barcelona, London, and Paris. No, and we discovered that even though all these important important cities, we did not that in Tokyo, but next time I think we could do it. Well, even though these axes had mainly the same kind of activities, it was interesting to see or to analyze that each city had its own specific important activity. No, we saw that New York has a lot compared to the rest of health and sport activities, that Paris was very commercial, that Mexico was more mixed, etc. No, as I mentioned, Twitter allows us to understand where people are in which time of the day and the day of the week. No, so here's a map of Valencia showing the tweets downloaded during 1 year. No, so each dot is not a tweet; it's just a concentration of tweets. No, so we can see how, as well, we carried out some studies using the text of Twitter and analyzing depending of some words which activities were held in which places. No, as well how along the 1 month, 1 year, 2 years in that case, the amount of tweets that usually go up when we have the important events in each city, or analyzing the most preferred urban spaces in each central city, as well, for example, which is the collective image of a specific place. In that case, we use Instagram to understand how was perceived this boulevard in Alicante, which is the front, the front of the harbor and the beach, or to understand which were the collective image in a different town, in a different places, just overlapping an important amount of pictures in Instagram, and trying to understand that these buildings represent somehow in the collective memory, on the collective idea of the city, a millstone, or in this case, we work on the idea of regeneration. So the question was, which streets could be or should be regenerated? Firstly, taking into account that we don't have money to refurbish everything, no? So what we did is we tried to understand where the activity was in that moment, which were the important spaces where people used to stay, and which were some facilities. And using these three and more data set, we establish which axis, which streets had the potential for a renewal of this neighborhood, no? So I think that I talk too much, in fact, more than 50 minutes. So I think that it's time for you to ask, for you to express what do you think about this, or which are your concerns, your understanding about the usefulness of this data.
Thank you, Pablo. Thank you so much. This was very interesting and very visual. I think it's, I mean, the visuals are amazing. I think that's very important, no? Because it's about is mapping, maps is in the title of your lectures. Maps have been always not only like pieces of information, but also like visually things that objects that we enjoy, right? So it's really enjoyable. Well, I could ask many things, but as I mentioned before, please leave your questions in the chat, or if you prefer to ask directly, you can also ask. Yeah, we have the first question. So we don't have much time left, so I would like you to write your chat questions as soon as possible, because we only have like 20 minutes left. And let's start with Rita, please.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to try to make it as short as possible. Thank you very much, Mr. Martini, for your presentation. It was very insightful, and I find it super interesting how you're using various networks to study the city, especially since it generates a lot of information in a wider angle. And I think it also allows people to be honest on their ratings, since it's a way of voluntarily expressing their opinion. My question would be, is there a way to filter the data in order to identify different target groups or different individuals, since I assume the personal data is not shared?
Thank you very much. Hello. The data that you use are aggregated, and as well, we cannot visit the specific profile of each person, because these data are not allowed to be shared. So we know, so the identification of each person is abstract. It's a number. It's not Pablo, Jorge, Jessica, Rita. We don't know who is sharing this data, but we know the information that it's shared, because when we accept to be a member of these networks, in the small letter, we agree that the data that we share could be shared by the whole users of the network. But for example, in Twitter, if someone writes in English in Alicante, we can understand that it's a foreigner. If someone is tweeting for 5 days and he or she does not tweet anymore, that means that it was a visitor. So we can imagine, or we can identify some personal aspects through the information that it's shared. But always the information is abstract. I mean, we don't have the specific name of the person, the specific profile, but and is always aggregated. We can disaggregate it. I don't know if I responded.
No, it was very clear. Thank you so much. So you basically create various patterns on like the users, and that way you can categorize the people who are using the social networks. That's very interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We are able to differentiate the data from a paid account and a free account. I mean, are we able to differentiate?
No,
and if so,
no, we don't. No. At least as I know, we cannot. No.
Yeah, because he's proposing that maybe through that we can check economic disparities.
Yeah, but we don't know. We don't know if it's a male or female. We can discover some things, but not the specific profile of a person, because it's forbidden to share that.
Okay.
I don't know if these companies use that for other purposes, but at least legally and officially, it's not possible to access to this data.
Yeah, and the same person Loic was asking if you have noticed disparities in the applications used by people. For example, like Asian countries use an application used here in Japan, in Korea, called Line, for example, more than European countries.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you found that, because you have been working in different contexts in different countries. Is that, I guess so, no? There is a difference in the usage of different applications, right?
Yes, there's a difference using different application. In fact, for example, we didn't study the Weibo, but in China it's used, and in India they have other applications. But as we use the ones that are close to our context, but we have been exploring the use of these applications in different contexts. And it's true that according to cultural conditions, according to even more, according to some periods, for example, you have the option of establishing the accuracy of the GPS location, no? Or for example, in Twitter, you have the option of switching on or off the location. And for example, when there was an earthquake in Mexico, all people switch on their location, and we had a lot of tweets geolocated. Or for example, in some cultural areas, they don't want to share the position, so it changes a lot. It changes a lot because we did as well a study in trying to understand the cultural differences in the use of this or in the information provided, and we found that there were, in fact, they represented somehow the cultural background.
I see. Well, I think next question connects with that, about not cultural difference, but how about gender aspects? Do you think that your research line or your research approach contributes to clarifying gender aspects on the city?
I think this data could be useful. For example, in this moment, a colleague of mine, somehow of us, Leticia Serrano, which is a colleague with whom I work usually, they are carrying out a research in which they approach the gender condition in accessibility to main underground stations in some cities. How do they do? What they select is some activities that are usually done by women. And for example, they study what happens with the care activities, which are mainly supported by women. So somehow it is possible to find some data that could give us some information. Because I repeat that, but this information, it's a valuable information, but do not represent the world. So we should and we have to check and to analyze this information with other methodologies or with other ways of understanding what happens, no?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Well, if you feel you got your reply, you can, yeah, I think so. I'm reading the chat at the same time.
Yes.
I think there is another question that maybe you didn't address. I know more or less the answer, but I think it's interesting. Like, how, I mean, do you know any useful common platform to collect different types of data? So how to collect them? Because we are seeing the results, right? We are seeing all the beautiful maps, super interesting maps, but there is a previous work of collecting them. Do you know any platform that can do that for us?
Well, I didn't mention that, but in order to be more brief, even though I didn't succeed. Each network has its conditions, and we obtain the data in different ways. We have a program that obtains data from Google Places, from Foursquare, and from the old Twitter. Now we are adapting it to X. But for example, Airbnb sells the data. As well, we can buy data of Twitter, and others, we obtain the data manually, which is a hard task. But for example, when we study a limited area, the photos provided by Instagram, we usually download them manually, because we asked permission to Instagram twice, and we didn't. It was the time in which there was a problem with filtering data and so on, and they restricted a lot the access in that moment, and we didn't try again. So there are very different ways of obtaining data, because each application, it's owned by a company, you know, in some cases they own several, and each company has its own way of obtaining, of offering this data, and but as well there are sales. I don't know if there is a platform. I imagine that this process that we do could be done as well informatically, and perhaps it could be possible to provide a platform that that combines all data, no? But we do it mainly in a SIG, in a GIS, in a geoinformation. GIS, in a GIS, and we visualize them.
Okay, so it's yeah, there is maybe the short answer is that there is no such a easy platform. It has to be like customized and done each like media by media or network by network. Okay, one more question I think is really a good question is the following by Maxime. The number of people going to a place surely determines its popularity, but its popularity the same as attractiveness, no? For example, here in Tokyo, like some places like Asakusa, or there is this very popular museums or exhibitions by a group called Team Lab, which are like very popular on Instagram, for example. You also have like TikTok videos where people go to places, but generally they edit them and they make them look like very attractive. So he's basically saying that maybe what we see on Instagram, on TikTok, etc., the kind of popular places that we see there, they might not be coinciding with actual attractive places. No? There can be like a gap between what we see on Instagram or TikTok and what we see in reality. No, like he frames it as the difference between popularity and attractiveness.
Yes, I agree totally with the implicit answer to the question. No, in fact, I mean, this is why in my opinion, it's very important to analyze in a careful way and with accuracy all data. I went very quick, but I mentioned, for example, about the places in Alicante, which is the case where we study. We found that we could consider the amount of different persons going there, or the amount of check-ins of times that people have been going there, no? And I think that this difference talks about what Maxime was saying, that it's not the same that an event can attract a lot of people or for example, a place attracted by tourists. No, it's mentioned, even it's mentioned. No, the way to distinguish that we have been using is this, for as I mentioned, we like to compare very different layers. No, in the case of the public spaces, we used Foursquare, but as well we use Twitter to know where these places were a place where people send tweets. And then we distinguish between the locals and the foreigners, depending on the language they speak or they write, you know. Then as well we try to find out in the literature which were the important squares from a historical point of view. So I think that approaching these data with a careful way could talk more than having the big number or the simple number of visitors in a place. So we have to take into account that the city, or in the case of urban spaces, have very different uses depending on the people that are using it. So these uses, these ways of approaching a public space, it should be considered and should be taken into account when analyzing this data. So mainly, I don't know if I for example, we couldn't do that, but another very important data, but at least in Europe are very, very expensive, is the data given by mobile phones, no, by GPS, no.
Yeah.
For example, these data were used during the COVID pandemic in Spain to understand where people were and how do they move. They mainly to approach which was the because Spain was really locked, and try to understand where people was moving, no? And this data would be very useful in terms of location, but I mean, if we had this data, we would compare them with the other data offered by the applications, no? But well, mainly I don't know if I answer or I just confirm the what was written. But I think that even that we know that there are different uses, we can somehow discover these different uses. Another thing, last thing, what we also do is that when studying as public space, Foursquare offers as well two more information. The one related to images, the pictures that people upload, and the second one, what it's called tips, opinions. So we usually study as well these images in which somehow we can see how these spaces are used by the people who uploaded the images, no? So it's a very deep part that we have to do in the data, no? And apologize for the long response.
No, I think it is great. I think it was very, very clear. Yeah, and it's already time now to finish, unfortunately, because there were like a couple of questions more, but I think probably the main issues I think have been clarified today. And yeah, I think it's maybe my personal impression today is that it's very easy now to have like a huge amount of data, but still this problem of how to analyzing them and to think critically of the data. And I mean, we still need to use our heads by the end, our brains. So it's not like, we get a lot of data and we just can visualize them and that's it. We need to think of critically of which data are biased, which not, and then how to combine. So at the end, let's say, like the classical methodologies of, thinking critically, which is the basis of research, is still, of course, or even more important than before with this incredible amount of data. And well, thank you, Pablo, so much for your great lecture today. And thank you, everyone, for your questions and your participation. And I think, yeah, we are finished for today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much to all you. And I totally agree with you. We cannot substitute the brain.
Yeah.
It's more important to use the brain in these cases.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Jorge, and all your team and all your class. And it was a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.